This video will explain what a functional behavior assessment is and how one is completed. There are 6 steps that need to happen in order to properly do a functional behavior assessment on a student. Those are: define the problem behaviors, make a plan for collecting data, analyze and compare the data, make a hypothesis, develop a behavior intervention plan and implement it, and finally monitor the plan. When you are defining the behavior, you need to be specific. You need to identify what behavior is being exhibited and what the circumstances are around the behavior. For instance, if I noticed Jessica was having some behavior issues in my class and I said Jessica is aggressive, it would be too vague. I don't know what the behavior is or where or when it is happening. But if I said Jessica hits, kicks, and pinches other students while transitioning to music, I know what specific behaviors she is exhibiting, who she is doing them to, as well as where and when they are happening. You will know you have defined the behaviors when they are observable and measurable. That means they are easy to observe, you can count how frequently they happen, they have a beginning and end, and they are repeatable. The next step is making a plan for collecting data on the student's behaviors. There are 2 ways to do this. Those are indirect and direct. Indirect methods begin with the student records, where you look for any relevant past data that relates to the current behaviors. Then you move on to things like checklists, questionnaires, and interviews, where you find out how others are perceiving the situation, almost like when someone gives a statement to a police officer. The goal is to understand the situations, where the behaviors are happening, and finding possible causes for them. Direct methods are more in the heat of the moment. They involve observations and recording the factors surrounding the situation. When recording an observation, it is important to record only the things you see and hear, like the child's name, what behavior you are seeing and how many times, or where you are. This is not a place to record your interpretation of the behaviors. Next, it is time to analyze the data and compare it. This is like summarizing, so think big picture. The idea is to organize your data so that you can easily see relationships between behaviors and events or factors, and so that you can compare your data with that collected by others. Here are a couple of examples of what those summaries might look like. On the first one, it begins with the setting. Write down where you were, what time of day, and things like that. The antecedents column is for triggering events that sparked the behaviors. Then we document the behavior itself, and finally the consequences. This does not mean how the child was reprimanded or disciplined, but rather what the consequence was that maintained the behavior. What did the behavior accomplish for the child? On the second one, it has a basic who, what, when, and where. Both should amount to the same information, but they are displayed differently. It is important to sit down with your team and decide how you want your summaries to look. Making a hypothesis is just what it sounds like. You are looking at the data that you have collected and trying to make an educated guess as to the reason for the behaviors. What is the child accomplishing or getting due to them? Generally, many find that the reasons usually fall under 2 categories. The child behaves that way to avoid or escape something, or they do it to get something. Once you have a good idea of what a child's behaviors are, when and where they are happening, and a possible reason for them, it is time to plan an intervention that you will implement. A behavior intervention plan uses positive methods to teach and encourage acceptable alternate behaviors. Those methods might be to modify the environment that the student is in, adjust the curriculum or strategy that is being used, change the triggering events or the result the student is receiving from the behavior, or teach acceptable behaviors that a student may use instead to serve the same function. The last step is to monitor the plan. Whatever intervention is in place for the student, it needs to be monitored by the team. They will collect data on the progress of the student to decide whether they are improving, maintaining, or declining in behavior. Review the behavior goals and evaluate them, and finally they will determine if the intervention needs to continue as is or if it should be modified. This is a cycle, so it can happen as many times or as often as it is needed. A functional behavior assessment is not to be done by one person. It is the job of the at-risk team, which may be the classroom teacher, special educator, principal, behavior personnel, or anyone else that works closely with the student. They all need to be involved in the process in order to properly complete the steps and ensure that a student is put on the best plan for them that will help them be successful.